Hello, welcome along to this week's Writer's Routine. We're chatting to the author Louise Candlish. She's the author of the crime and thriller Book of the Year at the British Book Awards a couple of months ago. That's for Our House, which sold over 200,000 copies. Over 200,000 copies across all platforms. We'll talk more about that idea and why that was kind of a game changer for her. You can find out how she's been thinking and talking about pretty much 3 books at the same time for the last few months. And also, Louise has written 12 novels. You can find out why she almost gave up midway through those 12 novels and why she carried on.
I just was very frustrated. I felt I wasn't having very much success. It just felt like I was a bit of an also-ran. But then, as I was saying earlier about the new ideas starting to obsess you, I could sense that I was obsessed with this idea for Our House, and new angles were occurring to me, and I could sort of tell it could be special. And I started it out of contract, which a lot of readers think that means out of contractual obligation, but it doesn't. It means you haven't got a contract, you haven't got any money, no one's paying you. The last book didn't do particularly well, so you're not getting royalties from the last book. You're literally, back to square one. But it felt very freeing and very, very exciting.
That's all on the way. Stay there. More from Louise Candlish this week on Writer's Routine. Yes, hello. Welcome to Writer's Routine, the show where we take a sneak peek inside the working day of some of the most successful writers around. And we've got a proper successful one today. We'll talk more about her in just a sec. My name's Dan Simpson. Thank you so much for giving us a listen. If you're new to the podcast, and if you're enjoying what you're listening to, make sure that you do try and give us a review over on Apple Podcasts, if that is how you're listening right now. If you're not, don't worry about it. If you don't like it, please press stop. Don't worry about doing any reviews. No, nothing like that. Thank you. On Apple Podcasts, though, find Writer's Routine and just write a few nice words about what we're doing. Also, make sure you include where you're listening to us, what country, what city you're in. It just blows my mind to think that this rabble that I'm putting together in my bedroom is helping affect the writing days of so many people all around the world. I love that. If you've got the time, please do leave us a review over on Apple Podcasts. Now, this week we're chatting to the author Louise Candlish. As I've already said, her last book, Our House, was phenomenally successful. It beat a whole host of some of the biggest names around to win the crime and thriller Book of the Year at the British Book Awards a few months ago. It sold over 200,000 copies across all platforms. It's still going great guns. And we find out why she thinks it was so successful and also why it almost wasn't. Her new book is called Those People, and we'll talk about how she wrote that with all the pressure of the success of Our House weighing on her shoulders. Now, hers is a writer's routine that properly works around her life. I mean, her daughter's growing up has changed her day of work recently. We'll hear about that. We'll also talk about how she lays her clues and twists and threads them together, and how she comes back and changes her work after editor's notes. I mean, I often think that's kind of strange. Like, how must it feel to be a writer? You pass it off to someone at your publishers so they can flick through it and tell you what they think. And then they come back to you with a whole host of notes, things that you need to change. I mean, how does that feel? Having to change your characters, what you've written, based on someone else's opinion. Also, we'll get a top writing tip from one of the best kids authors around too. First, let's get into it with Louise Candlish, the author of the brand new book Those People, and we start as always with what she sees around her in the place where she sits down to write.
Well, at the moment I'm writing in my living room on the sofa. And so I see on the right-hand side, I see a huge window. It's an old Victorian house, so lovely window with old glass and probably quite sort of creased and dirty curtains, as I'm not a great spring cleaner. And I will see piles and piles of my own admin and books and proof copies and manuscripts and cuttings. And then I'll probably also see the cat who sits next to me.
Are you at your own desk at this point? Are you sat down in a chair?
I'm on the sofa.
Oh, Okay.
Yeah, it's literally as if I'm watching TV. I would be in the same position. It's very relaxed. Then I have my laptop in front of me.
Any art on the walls? I mean, this grand Victorian dusty room that you said. Any arts there to kind of liven the place up?
Actually, there is. Yeah, I have one of my favourite things is a photograph by Patrick Litchfield of Talitha Getty and her husband Jean-Paul Getty on the rooftop in Marrakesh. Very famous fashion photograph, which I think was done for Vogue. And it's so the polar opposite of my life. It's really hilarious to look at it. You know, super glamorous, exotic, beautiful people. You know, far too much money, and I'm usually sitting there in holy pajamas and with like a kind of moulding coffee cup by my side.
If you were to take inspiration from anything around you, have you got a window in the room? Are you looking out onto a...
Yes, I'm not looking out, but I can see the the sort of inner suburban London street, because I live in South London in Zone 2. My books are set a little bit further out, but it's the same sort of vibe. I can see the whole, we can see each other through our windows. You can watch your neighbours, or you're very aware of what's going on. So I'm aware of street life. There's the London plane trees. There's all the parking disputes. There's the delivery vans. It's a similar-ish vibe to the settings I try to create, but maybe a bit more down market, because my house is nowhere near as posh as some of the houses that I have my characters live in.
well, very quickly, why do you think that is? I mean, I suppose we'll get into this in just a sec when we talk more about plot, but the famous adage, write what you know, is slightly true for you. I mean, you're doing a very Stephen King thing, not ranging too far out of Maine, of South London.
That's right.
Why are you always pitching up and you're writing people who are perhaps on a higher social level to yourself? Why do you think that is?
I think I'm kind of critiquing them. I think I'm kind of, trying to burst their bubble a little bit. I mean, some people think I represent those very posh middle-class people, but other readers can see quite quickly that I'm, in fact, I've got a few sharp things to say about the way they conduct themselves. And it's kind of somewhere in the middle, I suppose. But I just feel that that's a world I can understand psychologically. And in a psychological thriller or a suspense book, you really have to have the psychology right. It can't be implausible that someone would be provoked to violence over parking. I mean, it's got to really be true, and I've got to have seen it happen. And so I just know that world really well, for better or worse, and so it's very easy. But earlier in my career, I wasn't writing about South London. I was taking books, to different islands and various locations in Italy and France. It's only the last few that I've set locally, and I think I just enjoy it so much I can't leave. Maybe I will with the next book or the one after. And in fact, the book I'm writing at the moment, I go a bit closer to the river. It's more a kind of Thames story rather than deepest, darkest South London. But I'm just so in love with South London, and I'm really intrigued by the mix you get there, and the fact that my bit of South London, South East London, is still very up and coming. So you've got a lot of ambitious people. You've got a lot of aspirational people. And where you have those sorts of characteristics, you get a lot of conflict and clashing and tribes, and it's just fascinating. You mentioned the next book. If I were to walk into the room that you write in right now, as you're midway through getting it out there, would I see any clues to the subject you're writing about? Have you got post-it notes all over the walls? Have you got anything that gives you inspiration for that specific story? Maybe a giant whiteboard where you're scrawling on? No, I'm in that respect, I don't think I'm typical at all. I don't have post-it notes. I don't have a mood board. Sometimes that will come a bit later, actually, and I think, that will have been handy at the beginning, as I, put together some ideas for the cover, say. You might see something. You might see a little something. So, for instance, what you would see on the floor, because I noticed that there when I left this morning, is a timetable for the river bus, the Thames river bus. That would be a clue to you what might be going on in the story. So there are little clues. There'll be information leaflets, timetables, sort of things that I've picked up from my research. But you certainly wouldn't see anything formal, like a great arc of post-its plotting out all the cliffhangers You wouldn't see that at all. That would be in a Word document on my laptop.
And I know that you've been fantastically busy recently,
Yes.
but, herring all around the country, winning awards as well. So congratulations for that.
Thank you.
How easy do you find it writing, not on your sofa in South East London? Can you write in a hotel room? Do you write on trains often?
Yes, yeah, I can. I can write anywhere, but I need to not have conversation distracting me. I can't sit on a train with chattering people. I would have to have earplugs or music to drown them out, because my ear is very attuned to dialogue, and I can kind of pick it out over any other noise. And so if I'm somewhere with other people, I would find it very hard. And I know lots of writers write in cafes. I find that impossible. I just listen to other people's conversations, which isn't to say that's not useful anyway, because that might spark an idea for a future story or character. But in terms of actually trying to get some work done, ideally, it's fairly tranquil. But, needs must. And if you have a deadline, you work wherever you are. And if you are touring and you're on trains, you will work. And, if you're with your publicist, she'll have work to do as well. She or he will have work to do as well. And so you can get a bit done. And so, yes, of course I can. Yeah, I don't have to be on my own sofa with my own cat. It could be someone else's sofa and someone else's cat. The last couple of years, it's changed a little bit as my daughter's got a bit older. I used to always do the school run, and then I used to walk the dog, and then I would start at 10 o'clock. So 10 a.m. was my start time. But recently our dog died, unfortunately, and my daughter doesn't need me chauffeuring her anymore. And so I'm probably on the sofa ready to work at about 8:30. So I'll get up and I'll have, had breakfast with the family and, I've had a couple of coffees. I'll probably have checked my email while I'm, pre 8 o'clock to see if there's anything that, that I need to do before I start working. By working, I mean writing, but of course, there's huge numbers of other tasks involved, as you know. So probably about 8:30, I'll start writing, and then I'll try and be disciplined, and I'll try and do 1,000 words a day. And that's when I'm writing a first draft. So all of this is to do with a first draft, when you can be quite, you can impose a structure on it. And then I'll break probably for lunch, and I might watch something on the laptop, or I might go for a walk, then do a few more hours, and then my daughter will come home from school and I'll catch up with her. And then if I'm really close to a deadline, I'll then do an evening shift as well.
So you try to get through about 1,000 words a day. Is that the lower limit? Will you, on a particularly bad day perhaps, where they're just not coming, will you really push on with it and just get 1,000 words done, or are you quite flexible in being able to leave yourself and think, well, the ideas aren't coming, maybe I'll just rest it for the day?
I'm flexible. So the way I say 1,000 words a day, but I actually set out a work plan for myself at the beginning of a book, and it's a weekly word count, because I know what I'm like. I know I will have a day when I'm really in the mood and I'm enjoying writing the scene, and I might do 2,000 words. And then I might have a day when there's masses of distractions. I've got lots of, other things to do, like, taking the car in an MOT, or something to do with my personal life, and I'll know I won't be able to get a full day's work in. So I tend to have a weekly goal for myself. And I'm really flexible about it. I have a rule that you don't beat yourself up, you don't get anxious about it. If you have a bad week, then you make it up the next week. I mean, ultimately, you have this one deadline, and so long as you meet it, no one needs to know what you did. No one needs to know, whether you did it all in the last 2 weeks, like someone cramming for an exam, or whether actually you had it all nailed in the first month.
But you mentioned earlier on how one of the things that you need to tell your story is, almost silence. You need concentration. You need to lock yourself away with just your story. Is there anything else that you require to be able to get the words down? A final little quirk, an eccentricity, something, a coffee at a certain time every day. You need to be using a specific word processor. Anything that just helps you get your ideas down?
I think it's very prosaic, but I do need to feel like I've got an empty slate. So I do have to check all of my email and social media and feel like I've kind of done a bit of that before I start. Otherwise, I feel like that's sort of, niggling, and I've got to keep checking, because the great distraction for us all now is, the notifications and the constant, you could be on social media all day not doing anything else. And so I like to feel like I've got a clean slate before I start. So sitting down and writing isn't the first thing I do. And then the coffees, it's not really a ritualistic thing at all, but I will need constant coffee or I won't, my brain doesn't work. I mean, I'm definitely addicted.
Without nitpicking too much further, if you were to analyse your, 5-6 hours of writing a day, do you find that you work in bursts, 90-minute surges, and then you find yourself being distracted by things? How do those hours work for you?
Well, it's kind of different each time. It's hard to say that there's a standard answer to that. It could be that it's just all done beautifully in an hour, or it could be that it's quite a painful process. I'm very much a kind of get something down a kind of writer, so I'm not kind of polishing each sentence as I go. I'd like to get the scene, the bare bones of the scene down, and then I go over it, layering and layering and layering. So it probably is fairly consistent. If say I'm writing a scene, that's literally how I will do it. There will be, kind of skeleton with a bit of dialogue, and I'll know what's happening in the scene, and then I'll go back to the beginning of the scene, and then I'll go through it, improving it, cutting it, adding to it. And so it's a layering process, and that's just within the one day, and then there's multiple times that I'll read it and edit it after that. Those People is a really good one to talk about, because I actually began it on January the 1st or January the 2nd, so I literally can do you a calendar year of what's going to happen this year. So my deadline is end of July. So that's 7 months. That's 7 months if I'm starting on the 1st of January. That's quite tight for me. I'm finding that hard. So that will be the deadline for the first draft to go to my editors. But within that time, I have a new book out. So I have a book out at the end of June. So that comes with a bit of touring, launch, media, all kinds of stuff, nice things like this. That's all got to be slotted in as well. And then there's also my previous book, Our House, which is still a current book in the stores, winning awards, as you said, and I'm talking about it a lot. So I've got my deadline for the end of July, but that's not the only thing I'm doing. So it's really, really stressful and tough until that point. And then, of course, if I feel that the book isn't a high enough quality, I'll talk to editors and I'll get an extension. But I still, at this moment, I'd be working towards that end of July. August, I will then try and go on holiday. At school holidays, I'll try and go on holiday. And what I found in recent years is that there's no such thing as a holiday, really. There might be media things I'm doing from holiday, or there might be questions from editors, or they may turn around the manuscript very quickly and want me to get started on the next draft. But say I do get a holiday, and that could be 2 or 3 weeks. Towards the end of August, I will then get editors' notes back on the new book. And they are usually quite extensive with me. I'm very collaborative. I really need my editor's input. And so I will know that there is a big rewrite to do. And so I will then do that probably throughout September, end of August, September, and then I'll deliver the next draft. And that might come back 2 or 3 more times. And then by the end of the year, we've got the book, in the can.
And that then comes out the following July.
That will come out in usually
June.
Summer.
Yeah.
This year it's June. Last year it was April. So it's cutting it quite fine. I mean, it's probably as fine as they like to cut it with me.
It raises a few questions. So, I mean, this year particularly is probably one like no other for you because of the success of Our House. You're still talking about Our House, which you would have written 2-3 years ago now.
Yes, started it in 2016, I think. Yeah.
You've got the new one, Those People, that's out, when this will be released.
Yes.
You're writing a new book for next year. How do you find that muddle? Because, psychological thriller tends to, I mean, you do differ with the craft, but psychological thriller tends to be of a certain sort.
Yes.
How do you find with all of those ideas and all of those plots whirring around your brain, you've got to remember what you were doing, and you've got to be thinking of stuff new as well? How do you find that mashup?
It's quite hard. I don't know if it's true of all authors, but I am most interested in the project that I'm writing. That's the one I'm in love with. I'm really close to the characters. They're my favourite days when I know I'm going to be writing my current project. So the others, I've kind of slightly forgotten the kind of intricacies of the plot. So if, say, I was doing an interview about Our House tomorrow, I would have to quickly speed read it tonight again to remind myself of, the sort of minor character names, the little things that were important to me when I was writing it, the clues and the favourite scenes. So it gets eliminated from your mind once you've kind of finished writing it. And so you have to constantly remind yourself what those books, what they meant to you and what people are responding to when they're reading them. But your real passion is for the one that you're writing, because that's your live project and that's your, creative impulse.
So that's the past. Then looking ahead to the future. So when you've towards the back end of the year, when you're writing your second, your third, your fourth drafts perhaps, but you know that come January, I've probably got to start another book. How do you find the process then in the latter part of the year of having to force through an idea for a story that you're going to start writing again in a few months' time?
Well, it doesn't feel like you like anything forced. That's the great thing. And, touch wood, because so far what has happened is that an idea will surface and I'll think, I think that could be the next book. And I'll just keep it there bubbling and perhaps write it down so I don't forget it, as has happened. And then it will start to kind of build on a kind of lower level in my mind. And so by the time it comes to delivering the final draft of the one I'm working on, I'm excited and ready to go, and I can quite quickly start to think about pitching it to my editors. Because if you're within a contract, you need the approval of your publishers before you start writing. So far, it's all worked quite well, and the idea has been ready. I've never been, it's never been the day before I'm supposed to pitch an idea, and I haven't had one yet. It's never been that bad. There's usually been something that it's often an obsession, or it might be something that I've read, and I can feel myself becoming obsessed. And then I'll know that is the next book.
So 13th novel, we've said. What have you learned about your writing routine and how you tell stories along the way? Because I would imagine how you told your very first book, which was Prickly Heat, which was a few years ago now. I'd imagine your writing routine has changed considerably since then. What have you learned about the way you tell stories and how you can tell them better?
Well, they've become so much more complicated. So when I think back to those first books, they were quite simple stories. There weren't really any subplots. I told them chronologically. There weren't any flashbacks. They were simple and linear. And so, in retrospect, they were easier. But of course, I wasn't very experienced, so I still found them quite hard. Now I'm writing very complicated books structurally. And so the main thing I've learned is that I absolutely can't just start working and expect to get something on the page. I've got to have planned what I'm going to do. And the plot has to be quite intricately planned with a thriller. And so I've just learned to plan properly, and that saves me a lot of time. It's more efficient to do it that way.
Was that a conscious decision of yours to make your books more intricate, more complicated, perhaps harder to tell? Or is that just something that comes with the genre that you're now working in?
I think it has happened organically. I think that I've grown older, and I'm probably a darker person, a more cynical person. As you say, I'm now firmly in a genre that it is a puzzle for readers. It's supposed to be a puzzle or a challenge for readers with clues and so on. And so it has to be constructed rather than free-flowing. It has to be a constructed puzzle. But it has happened organically. I mean, people say, did you consciously change genre with Our House? But that just wasn't at all how it felt to me. The previous books felt actually similar-ish. But what I did try and do was raise my game. So I wasn't sort of changing genre, but I thought I was about to give up writing, and I had the idea for our house, and I thought, well, I'm going to go out with a bang. This is going to be better than anything I've ever written, and I'm going to try and make it better than anything I've read recently as well. And so I consciously raised my game, but I didn't consciously change genre.
We'll get more from Louise in just a sec. Very quickly, though, I want to say a massive thank you if you've supported the show over on Patreon, patreon.com/writers routine. If you like what we do, if you want to say thanks, maybe give a bit back, that's what you need to do. Just send a few dollars a month our way, like the price of a cup of coffee, the price of a pint of beer. Just pledge it to the show every month. That really helps what we're doing. It helps with the travel. It helps sorting things out with the authors. And most importantly, it helps us bring you as many episodes as regularly as we can. If you've already pledged, again, thank you so much. I've got all the rewards in the flat. I'm getting ready to send them out. I've got bookmarks. I've got badges. Very nice they are too. I spent I'm not a graphic designer, by the way. It was quite tough for me to suddenly be thrown into that world, but I think I've done a pretty good job. If you are due one of those, please fire an email with where you want it to be sent over to the website, writersroutine.com. There's a contact page there. Get in touch through that. And if you want a badge, a bookmark, if you want me to ask your questions to writers in the future and get your own exclusive Patreon dedicated episode, and it's really appreciated, I promise. Anything that you can give goes an extremely long way. Just find us and support the show over at patreon.com/writers routine.
Hi, I'm Abby Elphinston. My book Rumblestar is out now, and my writing tip is to not rush on writing a book. You've only got one shot when it goes to an agent, so make sure that it's your best shot before you send it.
If you've got any writing tips that have really helped your day, by the way, you can fire them over to me and I'll share it with our Writers Routine community here. Just send it to the website writersroutine.com. Right, let's get back to it with Louise Candlish, the author of the phenomenally successful Our House. She's back with a brand new book following up on the hype. It's called Those People. We talk more about that story in this half of the chat. We talk about the roadmap of it, how much she knows before she sets off, and how willing she is to drift down side plots that may come to her from nowhere. We also talk more about her characterization, how she gets to know all the people that she's writing about, and we pick things up talking more about the time when she seriously was willing to give it all up.
I just was very frustrated. I felt I wasn't having very much success. I wasn't particularly happy with my publisher at the time. I felt there wasn't, an enormous amount of marketing budget. And I wasn't hugely happy with the way the books were being published. I wasn't getting very many translation deals. It just felt like I was a bit of an also-ran. And I thought, well, actually, I'd really like to have some success at something. And so I thought, well, I'll do something else. But then, as I was saying earlier about the new ideas starting to obsess you, I could sense that I was obsessed with his idea for our house, and new angles were occurring to me, and I could sort of tell it could be special. So I thought, right, I'll do this. And I started it out of contract, which a lot of readers think that means out of contractual obligation, but it doesn't. It means you haven't got a contract, you haven't got any money, no one's paying you. The last book didn't do particularly well, so you're not getting royalties from the last book. You're literally, back to square one. But it felt very freeing and very, very exciting.
I promise we will talk about the new book in just a second, but just one last thing about Our House, because it has had such success and it obviously came at quite a vital moment for you. You said there that you sensed you were on to something special. What was that tipping point, that moment where you thought, hang on, I might be onto something with this one? Do you remember what it was that made you think this could be something that was different to what you'd done before?
I knew it was different from anything I'd done before because the structure was so different, and there was a crime at the heart of the book which I'd never read about in fiction before. So I knew that was new. I knew this was property fraud had not been the theme of any big thrillers. So I knew that was new. But I think the moment when I thought it might be different and special compared to my previous work was when I read back, say, the first quarter, and it felt like it had a really strong voice And voice is such an important part of writing, and it's the most important thing as far as I'm concerned, over structure and over character. Just the narrator's voice. And both of the narrators were first-person narrators. And both are writing, one writing in the past tense, one in the present tense. It was, I felt like these characters were really powerful voices. And I hadn't really had that feeling with my books before. And so I thought, well, if I feel like this reading back, I feel really, quite tingly about them. I feel like they're real people and I'm really worried about them. Maybe readers will have the same reaction.
And then moving into the new book, so Those People, you would have started writing this before all the success that came your way from Our House.
Yes.
How did you know how to carry on writing it? This new genre, this new style that you were attempting. How did you know that you were on to a winner and that you were going to carry on with this?
Well, I didn't. I didn't want to do the same. I didn't want it to be sort of, another Our House. I wanted to do something slightly different. And I think with writing novels, you are always reinventing the wheel because you want to do something different yourself to keep yourself interested. And so this time, what I wanted to do, I was kind of inspired by Murder on the Orient Express, actually, although that is in no way a spoiler as to what happens in Those People. But what I wanted to set up was a group of characters who could equally be the culprit of the crime. There's a death on the street. It's a group of neighbours. There's a death. And I wanted there to be several characters who could be guilty of this crime. And, to be genuinely, for readers to be torn as to who it was going to be. And so I kind of was very inspired by Agatha Christie with this one, which was, I can't say at all about Our House. I had different inspiration. With Our House, I was very inspired by John Lanchester's Capital. It was very much in the tradition of Gone Girl with the he said, she said, estranged couple at the heart of it. Whereas Those People, I kind of went back to Agatha Christie, I suppose. And those have got the same vibe as Our House. The way it's structured felt very different. So I was doing something new, and so that's how I found the time and the interest, because it was incredibly distracting during that period. It was really hard to write Those People.
So you've got this inspiration there, this notion that this is what I want, the flavour that I want my story to have. Talk to me about the very first moment that the actual idea for what became Those People cropped into your mind.
I'm not sure that I can pinpoint the exact moment. It was more a kind of growing awareness that I was seeing a lot of news stories about terrible neighbours, and I personally was clicking on them because I found them so fascinating. And I thought, is it me, or is the world getting crazier? What are all of these, terrible conflicts between neighbours and people, kind of threatening to kill each other over a boundary fence being an inch too high, or, a tree being chopped down. And so it was more of a growing awareness. And then I started, sort of saving some of the stories. And then I realised, I'm going to do a neighbourhood murder, because this is definitely a new thing in this new, in the society we live in now. We're all we're less tolerant, I would say. We all feel very entitled that we should live our own best life. And you hear that term all the time. It's all about, my things being as I want them to be. And if other people don't happen to agree, then, screw them, because this is my life that has to be lived best. And so I thought, well, if you transfer that to a neighbourhood where traditionally it's about cooperation and, everyone tolerating each other and live and let live, there's going to be a conflict there because people want their perfect house. I mean, we read constantly about lives being ruined by neighbours' renovations. And I've had my own life ruined by a neighbour's renovation, actually, which was another little thing that I stored away when that was happening. I thought, this would be good in a novel. This guy drove me absolutely nuts. And so it was more. It wasn't a single moment with Those People.
Then what happens next? So how do you transfer that into characters, into a plot? I mean, you mentioned earlier that your planning and plotting process is quite thorough and extensive. When you've got that initial idea, how do you begin the workings of turning this into a novel that will be read a year and 7 months later?
Well, I had a period probably when I was finishing Our House, when I was starting to think about the different characters, because this is a neighbourhood book. It's a kind of ensemble book. It's not like Our House with just these two central characters. There are 7 or 8 characters who you get to know quite well on Lowland Way, which is the street in Those People. And so I needed a little bit of time to percolate the various characters, and they needed to be sufficiently different from one another. I'd started to be quite interested in sibling rivalry, and so I thought, well, I'll have these 2 brothers living next door to each other, but one of them's the kingpin and the other one's the deputy, and how's that going to pan out, and how do their wives feel about this and their kids? And I'm also interested at the moment in seeing how society treats older people, and ageism has become a huge problem. It's far worse than it used to be, and I thought I'll have an older character, and she's 60 years old, and it's not that old really in today's in terms of life expectancy, but she is treated as invisible, and she's got her own quiet crisis going on. And then it seemed, the logical, only right, that the direct next door neighbours to the bad neighbours would be a young couple with a baby. Because what could be worse when you're a new parent than to not be able to sleep, and for your child not to be able to sleep? And so that was a no-brainer. I was always going to have a young couple with their first baby next door to the bad guys. And so it took a little while to get the characters together. I always knew who was going to die. I wasn't quite sure initially how I would have them die. And I talked with my editors a little bit about that, because the method of death that I had in mind, they felt was perhaps a little bit too similar to something that had happened in Our House. And so, I went for a long walk with my husband, brainstormed ways in which neighbours could die. And again, it's got to be plausible, not silly, not too melodramatic. And in fact, he came up with the death, and I'm really pleased with it. If you can say that about death.
No, that's okay, that's fine. Quite often on the show, writers will describe to me their timeline, what they know about their story as a roadmap almost. And some writers will know exactly what points they're going to hit, what service stations they're going to stop off at. Others might know the beginning, the middle, and where they're going to end up. And others simply get in the car and they decide where they're going, where the road takes them. What do you know before you sit down to write?
I love that analogy. I think I would know the towns and cities that I'm passing through, but I definitely wouldn't know the service stations yet. And I also would be prepared, after so many years of doing it, for a breakdown, or picking up a hitchhiker or something. Do you know what I mean? I expect the unexpected.
I do. This metaphor's getting away from me. So let's bring it back to your storytelling.
Yeah. I know the bare bones. I know there are 2 deaths in Those People. I knew who was going to die, and after various discussions, I knew how they were going to die. I knew who the culprits are, and I also knew what the ending was going to be.
You mentioned a second ago how well you know your characters. You knew you're going to have the bad couple, the young couple, the old person. Did that exist in a physical form? Are you sat there brainstorming, writing notes, and drawing up quite a comprehensive background of these characters?
No, I don't do that. I know lots of authors do that, and I think that's a really good thing to do. I'm usually quite impatient to get going, so I kind of get to know them through their dialogue, and I do. Sometimes I'll sort of think and I'll sit and consciously think, what do they look like? Although I don't like to give an enormous amount of physical description, because I like readers to build up their own picture of what someone looks like. A couple of details help anchor the character for me. But no, I discover the characters as I'm writing, and then also through the editing process, because as I say, there might be 5 drafts with a book of mine, and so with the first draft I might have editors saying, well, actually he's quite one-dimensional, and I think we need to know a bit more about him. So I might, at that stage still have a character who isn't entirely flesh and blood, and so it gets built up, and then you might change something psychologically as well in the second or third draft, and so that will have an impact on the character. So it's a kind of layering process.
So sorry to interject. You said that perhaps your editor might come back and say, this character's too one-dimensional, we need to thicken them, we need to flesh them out. As a writer, then what do you do? I mean, you can only understand your character as much as you can. Does that not feel a bit forced? So you've got to sit there and write in this backstory about this character that you don't really understand yet? It's
not so much the backstory, it's just you know the characters. I think that's the distinction. You know the characters really well, but you're not necessarily expressing them sufficiently to the reader. So it's very easy for you to then add some more detail or slightly edit their dialogue so you're learning something more about them, because they do exist in a three-dimensional form to you. It's just that you haven't successfully portrayed that on the page. So it's not like the character's a sketch in my mind and then it comes across as a sketch. He's real in my mind, but my editors will say, well, I'm not getting a true sense of him. So I'll then, dig back down to what I know about him, and I'll try and bring it with the next draft.
You mentioned earlier on as well that you have this almost a weekly word count, a weekly skeleton plan that you want to get done. How much do you know about what you're going to be writing day by day? So when you sit there on a Tuesday morning, your daughter's gone to school, it's you and the cat. How much do you know about those words that you're going to try and write that day?
I normally start, this is quite typical, I think. I normally start by having a look at what I did the previous day. Or if I wasn't very successful the previous day, I'll, sort of launch myself into a bit that I know is quite successful. And I can keep on going from that point. So I'm likely to be doing the scene that follows the one I did the day before, but that's really simplifying. I might go back to the beginning and start reading, and then find myself kind of developing something that I did a couple of weeks ago. So it's quite a loose thing. I have a strict word count and I have a strict schedule, but I don't have a strict order in which I'm going to write things.
What's the schedule, very quickly? Is that just when things need to be done?
Yes, that's the schedule for my first draft. So in the case of the book I'm writing at the moment, I started in January and I know I've got to try and finish a draft by the end of July. So that will be my week by week writing schedule that I try and stick to. But that's dates and word counts. That's not
plot
scenes.
Points.
It's not plot points.
The thing with psychological thriller, and particularly yours, because with the award that you won, I think it was noted that you are doing something different with the genre. But form is quite important, the way that you're telling the story and that you are doing something new. And it starts here. Very quickly, house-to-house inquiries by the Met Police. That's how your book starts, with reports that the police are getting as they travel up and down researching this crime. How much do you think about the form that your stories are taking, switching between narratives, the structure of sentences?
I think about the form and structure very carefully, because I tend to write in quite a slow burn way, building up the story. I try to have a structure where that something terrible has happened right from the onset, rather than having to wait for it to happen halfway through the book. So house-to-house inquiries is a perfect way of doing that. You start straight away. There's been a death. You're told that in the first line, but you don't know who's died. You don't know what the circumstances are, and that's gradually built up. And then you go back in time and see and meet all the characters and see how it led to this terrible event. So in that respect, I think very, very carefully about it, because in a thriller you have to keep people interested. And my thrillers are definitely on the end of the slow burn end of the thriller spectrum. This is not a kind of Dan Brown. There's a cliffhanger at the end of every page. I'm the opposite of that on the thriller spectrum. So I do. So I have to. So readers have to know that there's something intriguing going on to carry on reading. Otherwise, it's a drama that they're following and they don't know what's going to happen. In terms of the actual sort of phrase making and the sentence structure, that's all. I just do that very naturally, and then I'll polish it up as I go.
Last question. And it's about Our House, I'm afraid.
That's all right.
One last time, won Crime and Thriller Book of the Year at the British Book Awards. It sold over 200,000 copies in the UK across platforms. Why do you think it's captured the attention like none of your books have done before?
I think it began with the subject matter, the property theme. It's a property thriller. It's been called property porn thriller, and in the States they call it real estate noir. They've called my books, and it was one of the first ones. It was the first one to get attention. There was an element of the zeitgeist there, I think. And then once people heard about the book and read it, then they sort of see the other things that are quite innovative about it. But I think that it's that central idea of, woman comes home to find strangers have bought her house without her consent. And so it is that central idea. And, that's, as I'm sure you've heard in writer's tips many times, you have to have that single line great idea in a book, a hook that everyone remembers. And then they'll say to their friends, "Oh my God, I just read this book and this woman's house was stolen from under her, and £2 million." And so it's the central idea, I think, that caught the imagination. And then once people read it, I think they saw that there's a lot of discussion points in it, and it is quite innovative structurally. So there's a lot of meat on the bones once you get going. But people will have heard of it because of that property theft hook.
And that is it for this week's Writer's Routine. Thank you so much to Louise Candlish for giving me the time. I know she's incredibly busy, we've said it so much in the episode already, but I'll say it one more time. Our House, if you've not read it yet, you need to get on it. You might be the only person that hasn't. It's phenomenally successful. It won an award at the British Book Awards a couple of months ago. You really need to crack on with it. It's an electric story, much like her brand new one, Those People, which you can find more about over at writersroutine.com. Now, the next episode of the show will be with, it's a brilliant chat, by the way, just extremely free-spirited. It's with someone who was bored in the summer before she was heading off to university. So instead of travelling and doing a gap year like everybody else, she rode the Mongol Derby, one of the most fearsome and challenging horse races there is across an entire country. She didn't just ride it, she won the whole thing. And we'll talk more about her memoir in the next episode of Writer's Routine. I say next episode because, to tell you the truth, I don't really know when it's going to come out. I'm away for the next couple of weeks, going to Glastonbury, I know, and then New York. Hopefully I should have one with you next week, but I can't promise anything. So just keep across all of our socials to keep in check with it, really. We are at WritersPod over on Twitter, and it's Writer's Routine on Instagram. You can find out everything too on our website, writersroutine.com. If you've enjoyed the show, if you want to say thank you with a little bit of money, I'd love that. Just support the show and pledge what you can over at patreon.com/writers routine. You'll get some merch to go with that as well, so you don't come away empty handed. Thank you so much for giving us a listen. We will see you next time. Bye.